What's up, guys? Today we're going to go step by step through my process for reloading 5.56 223. We'll be doing a little bit of load development for the Mark 12 Mod O, and I'm starting from scratch from once fired brass, so I thought it'd be a good time to take you guys through my process start to finish. So what we have here is, like I said, once fired brass. You can see how filthy it is. Where I shoot suppressed, you get a lot of carbon back down the barrel and your casings are really nasty. But one of our steps will take care of that and we'll bring this brass back to looking like it's brand new. So let's get started with the first step. Alright guys, so our first step is we've still got our dirty brass here and we want to knock the primer out of the bottom of it. This is the very first thing I do with all my casings that I plan to reload. I go ahead and knock that primer out, and then we'll wash the cases. As you can see, for this step I'm using the Hornady Lock and Load AP Progressive Press. It just makes the process go a whole lot faster. You can absolutely do this with a single stage press. Like I said, this just speeds it up quite a bit. And I use a case feeder, which will automatically feed my cases for me, so I don't have to sit there and feed each one by hand, which like I said, really speeds up the process a whole lot. So you can see I've only got the single die in. That's a universal decapping die, so you can decap pretty much any case with it, you know, unless it's like a 50 BMG or something, but most of your normal cases you can decap with this die. So as you can see, I've already done quite a few. We're going to reload a little over 100 cases for this Mark 12. Once we got everything set up, we just drop our cases into our case feeder here. If I can show that to you guys. Hopefully you guys can get a good look at that. And I'll turn the machine on. And it shuts off once it's filled this tube. And it will continue to feed cases as we run these cases through. It'll continue to feed more. Now at this point, all we have to do is work the handle. As I pull that handle down, the case is fed onto the guide here, and this little pusher arm will push it into the shell plate. Like I said, guys, you can absolutely do this step on a single stage press. It's just a little more monotonous. You know, you've of course got to feed the cases one at a time, but it can absolutely be done. This is just a easier, lazier way of doing it. On the upstroke, it'll index around, and we're ready to go into our universal decapping die. Now we've decapped the old primer. And once we get all the way around, the cases will drop into our bin. And as you can see, we're just knocking out the old primer. That's all we're doing in this step. And now we'll move on to the next step. For our next step, we're going to clean these cases to make them look brand new. We're going to use Frankford Arsenal's wet tumbler. This is a great piece of equipment. When you guys see these cases after they come out of this machine, they'll be polished and look better than new. So if you guys are looking to pick up any of the equipment you see in this video, the presses, the dies, the cleaning equipment, pretty much anything except for these case feeders and the bullet feeder, you can pick any of this stuff up using the links on my campsite page. I have links there to Natchez, which sells pretty much any kind of reloading supplies you could ever need. There's links to Frankford Arsenal. Alright, if you can see down in there, this is just like little shards of stainless steel media. Different sizes of stainless steel. So from here, we'll just dump our deprimed cases in. Now that's a little over 100 cases, probably maybe 140, 150, maybe 120, I don't know, I didn't really count them. As you can see, we're about half full with the media and the cases together. This is the wet tumbler light from Frankford Arsenal. They do sell a larger version if you want to process larger amounts of brass at a time. I usually just reload 100 to a couple hundred cases at a time, so this suits me very well. I absolutely recommend Frankford Arsenal products. I've used them for many years. They're affordable. You can absolutely find more expensive stuff on the market, but everything I've bought from Frankford Arsenal has always served its purpose and has held up just fine. Frankford Arsenal's got a pretty good warranty. They're pretty good about replacing and fixing stuff that breaks, so highly recommend going with Frankford Arsenal, especially if you're a beginner. Now if you're into more advanced reloading, this may not be for you, but from my experience, I can definitely recommend Frankford Arsenal products. Alright, from here we'll go top this off with water, a little bit of Lemmy Shine, and some Dawn dish soap. Alright, from here we'll go ahead and add our Lemmy Shine. This is the Lemmy Shine powder. And if you go looking, you'll probably see 100 different ways people go about doing this. Some people don't use Lemmy Shine at all. You could probably use just plain water and get some pretty good looking cases back out of it. And this machine works so well, but I go ahead and use about a 9mm case worth of Lemmy Shine. I'll put that in first with the rounds. And then I'll go ahead and put some about lukewarm water. If you use really hot water, some people say it can tarnish your cases. I have used as hot as the water could go before and haven't really had any problems. And we'll fill it pretty much to the top. This lid does go down in it quite a bit, so you can't go much further than that. And then I just go ahead and put a little Dawn dish detergent. Doesn't take much at all. We'll put our lid back on. This lid has a rubber gasket that seals around it. Sometimes I like to wet that to ensure I don't get any leaks. Especially when I haven't used this thing in a while. And you want to tighten this down as much as you can. Alright, let's go put it on the tumbler base and let this stuff get to cleaning. Alright guys, now You just want to ensure that this does not leak, because you're going to walk off and leave this for about an hour or so to tumble. So just ensure you don't have any leaks. And what I like to do is go ahead and spin this a few times by hand to help even this thing out, because you can have a hard time getting it started if you don't on the machine. Alright, so then we'll just place it on the machine and turn it on. Alright, we're back in the kitchen. We let our wet tumbler go for about an hour and a half. You could probably get away with running it for probably a half hour, but I always let mine go for at least an hour and get really good results. Like I said, this is a very efficient way of cleaning brass, so you can play with different times and see what kind of results you get. There's many different ways to clean brass, but I'm specifically showing you my exact process. Dry tumbling is much simpler, but it doesn't give you the same results. Alright, so we've tumbled our cases. Now we need to separate our stainless steel media from our cases, and that's where this tool comes in. This is another piece sold by Frankfurt Arsenal, and it's made specifically for separating media from the brass. I'll take the lid off, and you can see there's a rotating drum here on the inside. This clamshell's apart. You pour your media in, close it up, rotate it. The media will fall through all these slots and your cases will be left behind. That's a bit of a simplistic explanation of it. You know, you got to do some rinsing here and there, but basically that's all there is to separating your media. When you're wet tumbling, you're going to want to have a towel around. Trust me, you're going to want to have a towel around. Alright, let's pour our water and media into this. Pour it slow because it will splash. And hopefully you can see how dirty that water is. And you all can see we've got media mixed with our cases there, but hopefully you can already tell how clean those cases are. Polished and look brand new. So now we'll close our basket. Make sure that's closed real well. And we'll set our drum back into the center notch. Put our lid on and just give it a few cranks to separate the majority of that media. It's best to use two hands. You want to rotate in both directions. Alright, that should be more than enough to separate the last remnants of the media. So we'll remove our lid. Shake off our basket. Set it on our towel. And we're ready to dump out our cases. And there's our beautifully clean cases. Guys, that's an incredible difference from what we started out with. And look how clean the primer pockets are. Hopefully you can see that. These are like mint condition, brand new cases. Very efficient and effective way of cleaning your brass. So I'll just give these a rough dry with the towel. And from here, you can let these air dry. If I was letting them air dry, I would probably give it 48 hours. You don't want any moisture left, period, left on these cases. They have to be 100% dry. You're putting powder and primers in here. If there's any moisture at all, you could make a dud. So you definitely want to make sure these are dry. There's a few different methods of doing that. I'll show you mine in a minute. But if you don't have the tool I have, you can spread these out on a wire rack and put them on low heat in the oven for a little bit. Like I said, you can air dry. If I was doing that, I would at least want a couple days to let them get 100% dry. But I'll show you the tool I have that works really well on drying these cases. Alright, this is my method for drying brass. This is a Hornady case and parts dryer. It's essentially just a dehydrator. So, you know, if you got a dehydrator laying around, it'll work just as well. Frankfurt Arsenal sells a unit that's a little cheaper than this one that works exactly the same. But they do work really well at drying cases out, and they have different layers so you can spread them out and get quite a few cases in there. So we'll get this loaded up and get these cases drying. Alright guys, hopefully the light's good enough in here to see and tell the difference between the dirty case and the clean case. This wet tumbler is the way to go if you want pretty shiny brass. I always do mine on 140 degrees. The time increases in 15-minute increments, and 2 hours is the max amount of time you can set this to run for. So that's off and running. 2 hours later, these should be pretty much dry, but I always do this step right before or right towards the end of the night. I would never want to reload these in the same day, so I run them in the dryer one day, and if I'm in a hurry, I'll load them the next day. Even after running in this for 2 hours, I wouldn't trust it to be dry enough to immediately load. So try to do your case prep and cleaning at least the day before you want to reload. So we'll let this run, and we'll pick back up with the next step in my reloading process. Alright guys, we've finished drying our cases. Now we're moving on to the next step in my process, which is annealing the brass. This is a very important step if you want to stretch out the life of your brass as much as possible. And for precision shooting, you want consistent neck tension, stuff like that. And the only way to get that is anneal your brass. Annealing extends the life of your brass by softening the metal right here at the shoulder and the case mouth where it gets worked a lot during the reloading process. The base doesn't get a whole lot of work done to it, so you don't really have to worry about the base. But if your brass up around the case mouth starts to get hard, you'll start to develop cracks, and then of course you gotta toss out your brass. Annealing it softens that metal back and helps keep those cracks from forming. So the annealing machine I use is the EP Integrations Annealer. You just feed them in one at a time. As you can see, you gotta set your flame, set the angle of your flame. All that's done by hand, but you get the most control over it. I found this machine works very well, especially for the small amounts I do at a time. I don't need no big fancy machine. This machine's worked great for me, and it's not overly expensive. And I've got it timed to where it stays in the flame just to the point where the brass starts to glow red, and then it drops. Alright, you'll see the brass just start to glow and it drops. As soon as that brass starts to glow, it drops out of the way. We don't want to overheat it, and we don't want it underheated. If it's not heated enough, we're not doing any annealing. So you've got to find that perfect point. And as you can see, the angle I hit the case with the flame, I have the bright spot of the torch just right at the junction between the case mouth and the shoulder. So I'll just feed some cases through, and you can see how quickly this process goes. Alright guys, I'll get the rest of this brass annealed and meet you at the next step in the reloading process. Alright guys, we've annealed our cases. The next step I do is stand them up on a piece of cardboard like this, and we'll hit them with some of this Hornady one-shot case lube. There's several different lubes on the market. I've always liked this Hornady one shot. It's very simple and has worked very well for me. I stand the cases up like this so we can get lube into the case mouth, because our next step is going to be resizing these cases. And let's go ahead and hit them with some of this Hornady one shot. You want to spray it kind of an angle so you get some on the side of the case as well as down into the case mouth. And I'll go at it from different angles. It doesn't take a whole lot, but I'd rather have too much than too little. Now we'll give this about 5 minutes to dry, and we'll start resizing them. Alright guys, we're ready to start resizing our cases. What I have here is a set of Hornady calipers. Any set of digital calipers will work. And attached to it is a Hornady headspace gauge. What this does is measure our case length from the base to a point on the shoulder. It's a lot more accurate than measuring off the case mouth, because that dimension can be wildly different. depending on what it was trimmed to and everything else. So it's really important to have this type of gauge. They're not super expensive. They make cheap versions on Amazon. But as you can see here, it just measures off of this shoulder, gives you a reading from the shoulder to the base. And what we can do is zero that measurement out. Then we'll run it through our sizing die. And we'll see how much we move that shoulder. So you can see we bumped it back 11 thousandths. Now that's a whole lot of bump, but since these rounds have not yet been shot in my chamber, I'm going to give them a little more bump than I usually would. And then after we fire them in our chamber once, the next time around I'll set my die up by backing it out until I get about 4 thousandths of bump, 4 to 5 thousandths, since it's a semi-auto. Now in my bolt guns, after I've shot a cartridge through it, I'll just bump those back about 3 thousandths. But we want reliable function in our semi-autos, so a little more bump doesn't hurt anything. So right there, we're right around 10 thousandths of bump, and I'll probably leave it right there. We'll load these up, shoot them, and then our next reloading, we'll adjust our die out very tiny increments until we get to about 4 to 5 thousandths of bump. See, our next one's right around that 10 thousandth. And not all these cases have been shot through the chamber. We're reloading these rounds for our Mark 12 Mod O with the new Roscoe barrel. So we'll do a little bit of load development, get the first shooting through these cases, and when we reload them again, then we'll really be going for some accuracy. We'll do a smaller bump, and hopefully by then we'll have a powder charge and bullet that barrel really likes. Make sure we lower our handle all the way. And I'm sure you've probably noticed we've switched over to a single stage press. I run one of these inline fabrication quick change mounts, and I've got 3 different presses, and they're all set up on these quick change plates, which allows me to swap my presses in and out. The Progressive's really good about if you want to do a quick action like when we were decapping, but you can absolutely do this step in the Progressive, but when I'm doing rounds meant for a precision rifle, I do all the rest of the steps from here on out will be done on a single stage press. So I'll run a few rounds through here for you so you get a good idea of the process. This press is the Hornady iron press. It's a real heavy duty press. I really like it. I like this open front design. It's a really solid press. Alright, I think you guys get a pretty good idea of the resizing process. We stood our cases up on some cardboard, sprayed them with Hornady One Shot for lube, let that dry a few minutes. We set up our resizing die, screwed it in until it was just touching the shell holder, took some measurements, seen we were getting about 9 to 10 thousandths of bump. Since this is our first cycle for this chamber, we're going to stick with that much bump, make sure we get good reliable cycling. If you did want to adjust your die so you got less bump, you would just very slightly back that die out, and I mean very slightly. It doesn't take very much at all to knock a thousandth off or a couple thousandths off, so you would just very barely make an adjustment with your die. So I'll go ahead and run through the rest of these cases, and you guys will go on to the next step in my reloading process. Alright, we got all our brass resized. The next step I like to do is run it through this dry tumbler, and I do that just to clean off the lube from the cases, and they get pretty dirty. You can see they're not real shiny and pretty like they was after they came out of the wet tumbler, which they'll probably never be that clean again until they're wet tumbled again, but I definitely want to get that case lube off. Hornady One Shot claims that it won't foul up the powder or the primer, and I have left them lubed in the past and just wiped them down and never had a problem, but I really like getting that case lube off, and about an hour in this dry tumbler is all it takes. Probably would take less than that, but I let them go for about an hour to clean all that case lube off. And this is just an old Frankfurt Arsenal media tumbler, and it works really good. I've got Frankfurt Arsenal corncob media in it, and we'll just dump our cases in. And put our lid back on. And we'll go let this run for an hour or so, and I'll see you guys at the next step. Alright, we've tumbled our brass in our dry tumbler with the corncob media to clean up the lube that's on the cases. Now we've got to separate the corncob media from our cases. To do that, I use this media separator from Frankfurt Arsenal. It's not a very expensive piece. You can see it's just a sieve. Frankfurt Arsenal offers affordable reloading tools that are very good quality. I've always had really good luck with them. And this just fits in a standard 5-gallon bucket. And as you can see, we'll just pour our media into this, and it'll let the corncob media fall through while maintaining our cases up in the top. Alright, now I'll just pour this in carefully. You do get a little bit of it bouncing up. I do recommend using a mask of some sort when you do this. This corncob media does contain lead from the expended rounds and could be a health hazard. You get dust in the air, and that dust can be contaminated with lead, so it's a good idea to wear some kind of mask. Now we'll just shake this over our bucket. You want to shake it pretty aggressively in different directions because you want the corncob media to empty out of the cases. Alright, now I just go through each piece of brass and do a visual check and turn them upside down to make sure that any media that's left in the case will fall out. We definitely don't want any of that corncob media left in the brass. And if you do see a little piece, like, I don't know if you can see that, but I've got a little bit left in a primer pocket. So I'll just tap it. Usually that'll clear it right out. And as you can see, I'll pick up 3-4 cases at a time, turn them upside down, and then just transfer them to my basket here. So as you can see, this step goes pretty quickly, and it's another opportunity to inspect your brass. You should always inspect your brass every chance you get. Look for case neck splits and any kind of damage that stands out that may be problematic. There's several steps in the reloading process that will give you the opportunity to inspect your case mounts, and mainly that's the main place you want to look is around this case mouth here. That's usually where they'll go first. You'll get a crack or a split right here in the case mouth. But anytime you tumble with media such as corncob or walnut, you want to check down into the brass itself, make sure none of that media is left over. Anytime there's media left in there, that can mess with the internal volume, which can raise pressures to a dangerous level. So it's a really important step. When I get these in a loading block, I'll also shine a light, which will really let you see inside that case and ensure that nothing's left over. This is not meant to be a fast process, so it's not something you want to be in a super hurry for. I like to reload on rainy, nasty days or at night when there's nothing to do outside. And I just take my time, make sure everything's done right. Especially when I'm reloading for a precision rifle. It's no time to get in any kind of a hurry. As you can see, this step goes pretty quick, so I won't bore you all with sitting here watching me go through all these. I'll bring you back when we get to our next step. Alright guys, the next step in our process is trimming the brass down. Now with bottleneck rifle brass, more than likely each time you shoot and resize, you're going to have to trim the brass. When you shoot, the case expands in your chamber, and when you resize, it squeezes that back down to the correct dimension, and that will cause the brass to expand up a little bit. So each time you want to measure your brass and make sure that it's within SAMI spec before you go ahead and reload it. That's where we're going to need a little bit of data from. I recommend getting a good reputable reloading manual, but the information is available online for free. You definitely don't want to go off some information in a forum somewhere. Most powder manufacturers have a reloading data center on their website where you can look up your specific caliber, your specific load. But most all of them will have the SAMI specifications for the case, and we're looking for the overall length from the base to the case mouth. In our lineman manual, you can see the SAMI dimensions for the 223 Remington case. We're looking for the measurement from the base to the case mouth, and if we follow that line down, we'll see the maximum length is 1.760. And if we flip over to the next page, it'll have a trim to length listed here of 1.750. So you want to make sure all your cases are between 1.750 and 1.760. If any are longer than 1.760, you definitely going to have to trim. Now in my case, for reloading for a precision rifle, I want to trim each and every time. It's beneficial for me to trim. That allows me to guarantee that every case is the exact same length. I like to trim to the maximum length allowed. That ensures that I get to trim again when I reload again. And it helps prevent a carbon ring in your chamber, in your rifle. When your brass is shorter, you got a higher chance of getting a carbon ring inside the chamber. So we want as much of our chamber protected as possible with brass, so that's another reason why I trim to the maximum length. Unfortunately, some of this brass is once fired, so we may not be at trim length yet. So take your measurements and find out you're going to want a good set of calipers. This just happens to be a set of Hornady calipers. And to take our measurement, we'll just make sure that we're zeroed. And as you can see, we're 1.749. So this case will not be able to be trimmed yet. As you can see in this instance, this once fired brass doesn't even meet our minimum trim to length. So you'll see that a lot with factory brass. No big deal. Once we shoot this again, more than likely we'll be able to get to trim length. In my case here, I'm going to be doing load development for a brand new barrel. In that, I'm just trying to find my optimal charge weight, seating depth, and all that. So case length's not too critical to me at this point, but it will be by the next time I reload these. We'll check a few others here. This one's 1.752. One 1.749, 1.753, 1.749. So it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to trim it all this go around. But I will take the time and go through and check all these cases. When you do go to trim, there's many different tools on the market that you can use that will help speed up the process or keep the process budget friendly. About the cheapest I would go would be these Lee cutter and lock stud trimmers. They're very inexpensive, but they are caliper specific. You'll buy the Lee cutter and lock stud, and then for each cartridge that you reload, you'll get the case length gauge and shell holder just for that caliper. So here we got 223. As you can see, the trim length's going to be fixed. We're not going to have any control over it whatsoever. This is our lock stud, and this is our shell holder for 223. So you just place the cartridge in the shell holder, tighten down the lock stud, and you can see you can chuck this into a drill to speed things up a bit. Then our case length gauge screws into the cutter, and we're ready to trim. You can do this by hand, or you can chuck this up into a drill. And this little point on the case length gauge will go down into the flash hole of your brass, and you just push forward and turn, and it'll, if the brass is too long, it'll trim your brass. Like I said, it's a fixed length, so you get what you get, but it is within those SAMI specifications, so these are definitely safe to use and great for anybody on a budget. Another fairly inexpensive option I found are these cutters that you can buy on eBay. They actually work pretty good. They measure off of the case shoulder, and you can loosen this set screw and adjust this bit to whatever length you want to cut the brass, and just chuck this up in your drill, then insert your brass while it's turning, and then it'll cut your brass down. These are not very expensive at all, and if you're interested in picking those up, pause the screen there and get whatever information you need. My preferred method, at least for 223, is this Frankfurt Arsenal Case Prep Center. It has a case trimmer here that you can adjust to cut whatever length you want. It indexes off of the case shoulder, and it also has the deburring bits in separate stations along with a primer pocket cleaner. Anytime you trim your brass, you're going to want to deburr it. This is a inside case mouth deburr and an outside case mouth deburr. If you're not running a machine like this, you can buy a handheld tool. This one's from Lyman. It's a very nice tool, works very well. And they even have a cheap copy on Amazon. I don't have any experience with that model, so buy that at your own risk. You'll notice when it comes to reloading, the sky's the limit as far as what you can get and how much you can pay for it. Luckily, there's budget options pretty much the whole way through, and there's very top of the line expensive options. There's way more expensive case trimmers than this Frankfurt Arsenal machine. I've had very good luck with this machine. It works very, very well, and I would highly recommend this. If you're interested in picking this up or any of the other Frankfurt tools that you see me using, check out the link on my campsite page to Frankfurt Arsenal. And there's also a link on my campsite page to Natchez. Natchez is a very, very good source for any reloading supplies. They have presses, all the tools you need, bullets, cases, powder, primers, pretty much anything you would ever need for reloading, you can pick it up at Natchez. Alright guys, I'll go ahead and run some cases through the Frankfurt Arsenal Case Trim and Prep Center for you. Like I said, I'm doing this video showing my process. This is a process I use. This is a machine I use for 5.56, 223. I've got the machine set to trim the brass to 1.750. Then once these rounds are loaded and shot, the next go around we'll go for 1.760. Once we have trimmed our brass, we'll then inside case mouth deburr it, then outside case mouth deburr. Then we have the RCBS military primer pocket remover here, and I'll run every case over that to make sure there's no military crimp left on the case. This is by far my preferred way to remove military crimps out of 5.56 brass. Some of this brass is factory AAC brass that didn't have any crimp from the factory. Some of it, like this Federal brass, did have a primer pocket crimp, and we'll want to make sure to remove that. A little line around the primer pocket, that indicates there's a crimp on this brass. Compare that to the AAC brass and you can see it's just a smooth transition from the primer pocket to the rest of the case there. This one has the line, and this one is smooth from the primer pocket out. When I'm reloading 5.56 brass for the first time, I make a habit of running it over this military crimp remover. It just makes the whole process a lot easier, and you only have to do it that one time and then you never have to do it again. And I'll go ahead and run all my brass through this, even though probably most of it's not even 1.750 in length, so it won't get any trimming done. I'll still run it over the deburring machines. The inside case mouth deburr makes seating a new bullet easier, and like I said, I want to run them all over this military crimp remover anyway. This case is measuring 1.757. So let's go ahead and run it through the machine. If you use this machine, they advise that you turn the case while it's trimming. Just helps make it a more uniform cut. And there you can see it did trim that case. Let's see what our measurement is now. We're right at 1.75. 1.750, perfect. Now I'll run it through the deburrs, the crimp remover, and I'll show you guys how quickly this process can go. You don't want to push in real hard or leave it very long on these deburrs. They cut pretty quick. Just lightly stick them in. Only takes a second on the crimp remover. And hopefully you guys can see where that deburred that case. And we've got a bit of a bevel on the inside of the case mouth that'll help with seating a new bullet. And you can feel when it's cutting. Like there, I can feel it's not trimming anything. So I'll go ahead and deburr. Not cutting. I can feel it's cutting the primer pocket out. And just so you can see, there's what the primer pocket looks like after it comes out of the crimp remover. You can see it looks more like the AEC brass now. We don't have that line around it. Well, there's a little remnants of the line where it wasn't perfectly centered, where the crimp wasn't perfectly centered. Alright guys, hopefully y'all get a good idea of the process here. I'll go ahead and finish processing the rest of this brass, and you guys will go on to the next step in the process. Alright guys, we're about to move on to the next step in our reloading process. Let's recap where we've been. We started out with some used brass, decapped those, got rid of the old primers. Then we wet tumbled our brass, resized it. Then we dry tumbled to clean off the lube, and now we're ready to start priming our brass. I'll show you my process. Again, there are many different processes you can use. Most reloading presses have a feature that allows you to reprime the brass on the press. I like to use a hand primer, and I'll show you that process now. Alright, as you can see, I've got all my brass stood up in loading blocks. You really need some of these loading blocks. They're very inexpensive, but they make the reloading process so much easier. I usually pick up these universal loading blocks, but like most things with reloading, you can go as cheap or as expensive as you want. They sell metal loading blocks that are very expensive, or you can get these cheap plastic universal reloading blocks, which is what I tend to do. They work very well for their purpose. These are universal reloading blocks from Hornady, and this is a MTM universal reloading block. And like I said, I like to use a hand priming tool, and I found this tool from Frankfurt Arsenal to work very, very well. I believe they call this their platinum hand priming tool, but it works very well. You can adjust the seating depth of the primers. It's a solid unit made of metal. Haven't had any problems with it. Highly recommend it. And you can pick this up using my campsite link in the description below. On my campsite page there's a link to Frankfurt Arsenal. There's a link to Natchez, Brown Ales. There's several places that sell this hand priming unit. So this is the tool itself. And you can see I've got several different shell holders. So we just need to find the shell holder that we need to use for 5.56, and luckily they include this little card that tells you which shell holder to use. So we'll just go down through here and find 223 Remington, and it suggests a number 4. So we just come and find our number 4 shell holder, and we're going to take the old one out by pushing down on this black button right here. Hold that down. The shell holder slides right out. And right there we can swap out our priming arm if we're going from small primers to large primers. I've already got the small primer installed, so all we got to do is slide in our new shell holder. Now we can load our primer tray up with primers. I'm using CCI 400s. These are small rifle primers. These aren't really recommended for 223 or 5.56 that's going to be shot through a semi-automatic. In the AR-15 it has a floating firing pin, and you can have detonations due to that floating firing pin when you close the action. So they really suggest using their military primers. They have a little bit of a harder cup on them and not so easy to detonate. I have used CCI 400 primers reloading for AR for years. I've never had that problem, but it can happen. Unfortunately, primers can be kind of hard to come by. If you order them offline, there's usually a hazardous shipping fee of $25, and that can really get costly. So sometimes you got to use whatever you're able to get your hands on. If you are stuck to ordering powder and primers offline, I suggest subscribing to Natchez's email notifications, because about once a month or so they usually offer a couple days with free hazardous shipping, and you can avoid that hazardous shipping fee. Alright, to load our primer tray, we just flip our primer box upside down and just slide it apart over our tray. You want to make sure all your primers are oriented face up. To do that, you just shake the tray. And due to the texture on the bottom of the tray, that will flip the primers over for you. You might have one or two that you gotta flip by hand, but no big deal. And there, all our primers are oriented face up, so we can put our cover back over our priming tray. The priming tray just goes into the back in this slot. Once it's in the slot, you can open that little chute up and allow primers to go into the tool. Place a piece of brass in the shell holder, and always make sure you're pointing this away from your face in case there's a primer detonation. It's highly unlikely that would happen, but it can happen, and if it does, you definitely don't want this pointing at your face or any kind of sensitive area. And we just squeeze our lever, and we have a piece of prime brass now. You want to make sure the primer's sitting just below flush of the base of the case, and that one is. And now we can move on to our next piece. So this goes pretty quickly. And with this priming tool, you get a really good feel on seating that primer. Whereas on a press, you got much more mechanical advantage, and you can really crush that primer in there. You just want to seat the primer to its correct depth, nothing more. It's really easy to feel when that primer hits the bottom of the primer pocket with a hand priming tool. And you can move along pretty quick. Just as you go, you want to visually make sure that the primer is set just below flush of the base of the case. Do that for each and every one. And I'll finish priming the rest of these cases, and I'll meet you guys at the next step where we'll measure out and add our powder to the case. Alright guys, we're about to start adding our powder to our cases, and before we do that, we need to settle on a load. If we already know what size bullet and what kind of bullet we're going to be using, that makes things a little bit easier. Here we know we're going to be using a 77 grain Sierra Match King. And here in our Lyman reloading manual, we can see for 223 Remington, we have loads for the 77 grain Sierra Match King, and it gives us several different powders here. Now, since I'm going to be doing load development for a brand new barrel, I'm going to try a couple different powders. Hodgkin Varget, which I've had pretty good luck with in the past with 223. And a new powder for me, I'm going to be trying Alient AR Comp. For my load development process, what I'll do, I've got 50 cases here, primed, ready. I'll load up 5 cases with different powder weights, and I'll do 25 in each powder. We'll find a starting weight, and then we'll decrease by 0.3 grains over each set of 5. So for an example, for Varget, the book lists the max load for Varget at 25 grains. Okay, generally you don't want to start at the max load, you want to work your way up to it. So I've backed off to 24.7 grains of Varget for 5 cases. Then I'm going to decrease 3 grains, 0.3 grains, and go to 24.4 grains, 5 cases. Then I'm going to do 24.1 grains. For 5 cases. Then we'll decrease another 0.3 grains and do 23.8 grains. And finally for Varget, we'll do 23.5 grains. Now when we go out and start shooting, we're going to start at this lower powder charge, get our velocities over 5 rounds, and then we'll go up. And if we start seeing signs of pressure before we get to the max, we can stop anywhere that we think we need to. So we'll go with which one gives us the best group and has the lowest extreme spread and standard deviation. So when I go out to shoot these, I'll take my chronograph and shoot all these over a chronograph and group them at the same time so we can see which one we like the best. Same way with AR Comp. So we've picked the powder we want to use, we've picked out our powder charges, now we're ready to start adding powder to our cases. Alright guys, here's what I use to measure my powder and dispense my powder. This is the Hornady Auto Charge Pro. If you guys can't tell, I'm a big fan of Hornady products. Hornady's a really great company. They back up their products. If you have any problems with it, you can contact them. They'll fix it, replace it, whatever they need to do. It's an American company, and I like to support American companies when I can. I've had a really good experience with this Hornady Auto Charge Pro. It's very, very accurate. I've measured it against balance beam scale weights and is very, very accurate. Now they are pretty expensive. You definitely don't have to have one of these to get by. You can use a little electronic scale or the balance beam scales. I like those. Those are very accurate. Just find something that you can trust, that will accurately measure your powder. Whatever scale you end up going with, I suggest picking up one of these check weight kits. This one is a pretty inexpensive kit. It's available on Amazon. Before I throw any powder charges, I'll always calibrate the scale using the factory supplied method, and then I grab this little kit and I'll use some of these little check weights and just verify that I'm getting good weights. This is a 5 grain weight, and you can see we read exactly 5 grains. Let's add a 1 grain weight, and you can see we're right at 6 grains. Now that we have faith that our scale's reading correctly, we'll go ahead and fill our machine up with powder. And we'll start with the Hodgkin Varget. What I'll do is dispense a charge, and I'll put my funnel over the case, fill the case with each charge as I go, and I'll fill all these up before we move on to seating bullets. Our starting load with Varget was 23.5 grains, so we'll punch in 23.5. Enter, and once we're zeroed out, we just hit dispense. It'll trickle up the last few grains, and then when it hits the target grains, you hear the beep. So I dumped that pan. Now I'm ready to dispense my next charge once the scale's zeroed out again. Now I've thrown 5 charges at 23.5 grains. Since I'm doing load development, I'm going to increase the grain weight by 3 grains. Now if you guys are not doing the load development process and you're just loading random 223 for whatever gun, you can pick your charge weight. Just make sure it's in between the minimum and the maximum charge weight listed in the load manual. Set it and just do all your cases at that grain weight. So I'm going to bump this up to 23.8. And dispense the next set of 5 charges. And I'll keep doing this process till I get all my cases charged with powder. Then we'll see you guys on the next step. Alright guys, we've made it to the point where we're ready to finally seat our bullets. This is definitely the most enjoyable part of reloading. As you can see, I'm using my single stage Hornady iron press. I have a 223 seating die from Hornady mounted up, and I'm running Hornady's click adjust bullet seating micrometer that just screws into the place of the factory seater on the Hornady die. This makes adjusting your bullet seating depth much easier and more accurate. And again, if you guys are just starting out, there's definitely cheaper options. You can get a Lee single stage press and use Lee dies to get the job done. Alright, we've primed our cases, we've charged our cases with powder, so now we're ready to seat a bullet. We just put our case in our shell holder. The bullet I'm seating is a 77 grain Sierra Match King. It's a 22 caliber bullet. And we just hold our bullet until it starts up into the die. And the way I do it, I'll seat it about halfway, lower it, and then spin the case about 180 degrees and finish seating the bullet. Now that's probably not necessary. That's probably being a little over dramatic. But I want my bullets seated as concentrically as possible. And if there's any inconsistencies in that die, it's believed that by rotating the case 180 degrees, you're switching those inconsistencies to the other side, so theoretically you should get a more concentric bullet by turning it that way. Whether it works or not, who knows, but like I said, I don't get in any hurry when I'm reloading, so if there's a chance it does help, it only takes an extra second to do, so I'll go ahead and do it. And you can see this process goes by pretty quickly. And there you can see our finished round. That round is ready to shoot, but I take it through one more step. Since these will be shot through a semi-automatic, our next step, we'll go ahead and put a crimp around the case mouth to help hold that bullet in place. So if you're shooting a bolt action or a single shot, you're better off not crimping the case. But if you're going to shoot these from a semi-automatic, it's better to go ahead and crimp the bullet. That way you don't have to worry about that bullet walking out of the case in the magazine during recoil. And that's why I buy these bullets with a cantilever. You can get these without the cantilever in the middle, but since I shoot these from semi-automatic platforms, I go ahead and get the bullets with the cantilever, and that just helps hold the bullet in place more securely. You can crimp the bullet whether it has the cantilever or not. The cantilever just helps make it a more secure crimp. So this is seating a bullet. You can stop here if you're using a single shot or a bolt action. If you're running a semi-automatic, I suggest hanging around, seeing the next step where we'll go ahead and crimp these bullets. Alright, for now, for my semi-automatic reloaders out there, I've got the Lee factory crimp die installed. As far as I'm aware, this is still the best option on the market for crimping a bullet. Luckily, it's very inexpensive. Lee offers very affordable reloading supplies, so these dies are not very expensive at all. And you'll see very advanced reloaders that use top of the line dies still crimp their bullets with this Lee factory crimp die. It's a very, very good design, simple, and does a very good job. And hopefully that'll focus and you can see it just puts a little line right around the top where it crimps that case mouth into the bullet just a little. You don't want to overdo this step. When you're setting up the die, you'll place a loaded round into the shell holder, raise it all the way up. You'll screw your die down until it makes contact, lower the ram a little bit, and give it a quarter turn at a time until you get your desired crimp. It doesn't take very much at all, so once you notice a slight crimp on the case mouth, I suggest stopping there. You don't want to over crimp. Alright guys, that concludes my reloading process for 223. Now these are my precision reloads that I reload for precision rifle, my Mark 12s to be specific. For my regular ARs, just everyday AR-15 reloads, I'll do those on a progressive press. I'll get to that one day to show you guys that process. It's a much quicker, easier process. But the process we just walked through will work for beginners. Like I said, you definitely don't need the same type of equipment. There's more inexpensive equipment on the market. If you're really on a budget, I suggest starting out with Elite Precision reloading equipment. I reloaded with Elite Precision stuff for many years and got by just fine. I've just upgraded my stuff over the years. The rounds I just seated bullets on are for load development. I'll go out and shoot those rounds over a chronograph and group them, and I'll pick the best group and best standard deviation and extreme spread, and that's the powder charge I'll reload all the rest of my rounds with. You can do that same process if you're wanting to work up a more precise load. I've got a separate video detailing the load development process at the chronograph and all that. Just scroll through my videos, you'll find that. If you guys are looking for equipment to get started in reloading, or you're looking to upgrade some equipment you already have, be sure to use the link in the description to my campsite page. On my campsite page you'll find a link to Natchez. Natchez has any and all reloading equipment or reloading supplies you could possibly need. I appreciate you guys watching this video. If you've got any questions or comments, drop them in the comment section. Be sure to hit that like button and be sure to subscribe, and be sure to catch us on the next video.